My name is Harold. I am 72 years old, and 3 days ago, I walked into my own funeral alive. I can still see the looks on their faces. My son Mark, holding a handkerchief to dab at fake tears, froze as if he had seen a ghost. My daughter Clara dropped the rosary beads she was squeezing, and her sobs died in her throat. Even the priest gasped, crossing himself, as if the devil himself had just walked in. But it was not the devil who entered that chapel. It was me, the man they thought they had already buried, the father they tried to erase from the world, so they could pocket every last dime I had worked for. I walked in flanked by 2 uniformed police officers. The sound of my cane tapping against the floor echoed louder than the organ music. The coffin at the front of the room was closed, covered with lilies and ribbons. Everyone thought my body was inside, but the coffin was empty. They had staged my death. My children had arranged the entire spectacle, hired mourners, printed black and white photos of me in my youth, and plastered them around the chapel to make everything look authentic. And all of it was, for one reason, money. They wanted my house, my savings, the small piece of land that had been in our family for generations. My life, my sacrifices, my dignity reduced to dollar signs in their eyes. I watched them as the whispers spread through the crowd. Is that Harold? But he's dead. What is going on? The neighbors who had come to pay their respects turned to stare. Some looked terrified, others scandalized. But my children, my own flesh and blood, looked like cornered animals. Mark's jaw clenched so tight I thought he would break his teeth. Clara's hands trembled as she tried to compose herself. They had prepared for everything except for me, walking in alive. And as I stood there staring at the people I had raised, I asked myself the question. I will now ask you, what would you do if the very children you carried in your arms, fed with your own hands and trusted with your love, staged your funeral while you were still breathing? Tell me, would you break down and cry, or would you rise with fury demanding justice? Comment 1 right now if you believe this is the most vicious kind of betrayal a parent could ever face. You see, the world loves stories about ungrateful children, but no one truly believes it could happen to them. You always think, not my family. My children are different. My daughter would never lie. My son would never betray me. I used to think the same. I was wrong. They didn't just wish me dead. They made plans as if I were already in the ground. They spoke to lawyers, forged papers, ordered flowers, and invited guests. They did everything except put me in the coffin, because in their eyes I was already nothing but a walking corpse. When I opened the doors of that chapel, time seemed to stop. I felt no fear, only a cold determination. For weeks I had played along, pretending to be weaker than I really was, letting them think their plan was working. And in that single moment, with all eyes on me, I revealed the truth. My voice cut through the silence. "Good afternoon," I said. "I see my funeral is going well." The gasp that followed was like thunder. Some people dropped their prayer books. One woman fainted. But the only faces I cared to watch were Mark and Clara's. Their masks slipped. Their lies were exposed in front of the entire town, and soon in front of the law. I raised my cane, pointing it toward the altar, where the lawyer was about to read the will. Before you hear a single word about my estate, there is something you should all know. I am not dead. And my children are not grieving children. They are thieves, liars, and would-be murderers of their own father. The police officers at my side stepped forward, their presence sealing the truth. Murmurs turned into shouts. Some cursed, some prayed louder. The air was thick with disbelief. Now, I need you to understand something. Walking into your own funeral is not just shocking, it is devastating. It is the kind of wound no medicine can heal, because when your enemies plot against you, you expect it. But when it comes from your own blood, the betrayal burns deeper than fire. I wanted to collapse. I wanted to scream. But I held my head high, because that day my dignity mattered more than my pain. I will take you back piece by piece to how we reached that moment. How did 2 children who once clung to my legs in fear of the dark grow into people who could forge my death certificate? How did I, a man who built everything with calloused hands and a faithful heart, become nothing more than a target for greed? And most of all, how did I survive long enough to expose them when they thought they had won? Stay with me, because this is not just my story. This is a warning. Betrayal does not come from strangers. It comes from the people sitting closest at your dinner table. If you believe a story like this can only end in tears, you are mistaken. Sometimes it ends with handcuffs, shattered lies, and a father reclaiming the dignity his children tried to bury. But before I show you the ending, you need to know the beginning. Because only by understanding the love that once existed can you grasp the depth of the betrayal that followed. And only by seeing the cracks in the foundation can you understand how the house of lies was built. So, once again, let me ask you, what would you do if your son and daughter declared you dead, dressed in black, and celebrated your absence while you were still alive? Would you stay silent and fade into the shadows? Or would you rise like I did and take back the dignity they tried to steal? Comment 1 now, if you believe no betrayal is darker than this. Before you judge my children too harshly, you need to understand what they once meant to me. Because betrayal in its purest form can only exist where there was once deep love. And there was love, plenty of it. My name is Harold, but for most of my life, I was simply called Dad. To Mark and Clara, I was the man who could fix a broken toy with duct tape, and a smile, the man who never let them go to bed, hungry. The man who stood at the end of the school hallway, no matter how late the bell rang. I wasn't a rich man. I never wore a suit to work, never carried a briefcase. My uniform was a pair of oil-stained overalls and boots with soles so worn you could almost see the ground through them. I was a mechanic for 40 years. My hands were calloused, my back bent, my nails permanently blackened from grease. But those hands put food on the table. Those hands held my children steady when they took their first steps. Those hands wiped away tears when nightmares kept them awake at night. When my wife passed away, Clara was only 12 and Mark just 15. That day I became both mother and father. I still remember standing at her graveside, holding their small, trembling hands and promising them that no matter how hard life became, I would never let them feel abandoned. That promise shaped every decision I made. I gave up my own dreams. I turned down promotions that required travel. I stayed in our small town because stability mattered more than ambition. I cooked clumsy meals, burned more dinners than I care to admit. But my children always laughed and ate anyway, pretending they liked it, just to see me smile. Sundays were sacred. We didn't have much money for vacations or fancy outings. But we had the park. We had ice cream cones. We had board games spread out on the kitchen table. Clara loved to sit in my lap while I read stories, her hair brushing against my chin. Mark would beg me to toss a football with him in the yard until the sun went down. At night, when exhaustion pressed on me like a heavy blanket, I would peek into their rooms and watch them sleep, whispering to myself, "This is why I keep going." And let me tell you, it wasn't easy. There were days when bills piled up higher than my paychecks. Days when the car broke down and I still had to walk miles to the shop. Days when loneliness hit me like a hammer. But every time I looked at their faces and felt strength return. They were my reason to live. My entire existence revolved around them. And if you had asked me then, I would have told you they loved me just as fiercely. Mark was the quiet one. He was tall and serious, always following me around the garage, asking about carburetors and engines, pretending to care about cars just to be near me. He'd bring me water when I worked long hours, sit on the floor with his homework, and sometimes fall asleep there, head resting against the wall while I tightened bolts. I thought one day he would take over the shop. I pictured a sign that read, Harold and Son. Above the door, our family name carrying on through generations. Clara, on the other hand, was light itself. She laughed easily, danced barefoot in the kitchen. When the radio played old songs, hugged me so tight I thought my ribs would crack. She used to write little notes and slip them into my lunchbox. "I love you, Daddy. Don't work too hard. You're my hero." Those scraps of paper, childish handwriting, scrawled in bright markers, were worth more to me than any paycheck. I kept them in a tin box, and even now, decades later, I still have them. I believed I was raising children who understood sacrifice, who would grow into adults with kindness in their bones. I believed they knew what it cost me to keep our little family afloat. I never remarried, not because I didn't have chances, but because I didn't want them to feel like second place in anyone's heart. My life was theirs. Every dollar I saved, every hour I worked, every gray hair on my head, it was all for them. We had our traditions. On Christmas Eve, no matter how cold the garage was, I'd push the car parts aside, bring out a small tree, and we'd decorate it with mismatched ornaments. We'd drink hot cocoa, too sweet for my taste, but perfect for theirs. And we'd stay up late singing carols off key. On their birthdays, I made the ugliest cakes you've ever seen, lopsided and messy. but they always clapped and said it was delicious. On Clara's 16th birthday, I sold my favorite set of tools just to buy her the dress she wanted. On Mark's 18th, I gave him the watch my father had given me. These weren't just gifts, they were pieces of me. And I thought those pieces meant something. I thought they were building blocks of loyalty, gratitude, love. I thought one day when I was old and frail, they would stand by my side just as I had stood by theirs. Isn't that what we all think? That if you pour yourself out for your children, they will one day pour back into you. That family is the only investment guaranteed to return with interest. I see now how naive I was, because the truth is love is not always returned. Sometimes love is twisted, exploited, taken for granted until it becomes invisible. Looking back, there were cracks, even then small things I brushed aside. But in those years, all I saw was beauty. All I felt was pride. So, when I tell you I walked into my own funeral alive, don't think I am some bitter old man who never loved his family. I loved them with everything I had. That is what makes this story so cruel. That is what makes the knife cut so deep. Because before there was betrayal, there was trust. And before there was greed, there was love. And that is why, when the first signs of betrayal began to appear, I refused to see them. I closed my eyes, convinced myself it was just stress, just misunderstandings. I chose blindness because the alternative that my own children could turn against me was too painful to imagine. But denial does not stop the truth. It only delays it. And soon the first red flags would appear and my heart would learn the meaning of fear. So, tell me, do you believe love guarantees loyalty? Or do you think even the most loving father can be betrayed by the very children he raised? Comment yes right now if you believe love should never be repaid with betrayal. The first cracks were so small I almost convinced myself they didn't exist. That is the cruel thing about betrayal. It never announces itself with a trumpet. It begins with whispers, with shadows, with glances you are not meant to notice. It begins with things you can explain away until one day you can't. It started after I retired. For 40 years, my alarm had rung at 5 a.m., and I had dragged myself to the garage, rain or shine. Retirement was supposed to be peace, a time to sit on the porch with a cup of coffee to watch the world go by, without worrying about deadlines or customers. But peace never came. Retirement gave me time to notice things I had been too busy to see before. Mark visited less often. He said work kept him busy, but when he did come around, his eyes darted around the house like he was taking inventory. He would ask casual questions about the deed to the property, about whether I had updated my will about my savings account. He tried to make it sound like concern, but there was a sharpness beneath the words, a hunger he didn't bother to hide. Clara, once so warm, began to treat me like a burden. "Dad, you shouldn't be cooking anymore. You might burn yourself," she would say, snatching the frying pan from my hands. "Dad, don't worry about the bills. Just give me the checkbook, I'll handle it." At first I was grateful. Age had slowed me down, my knees ached, my memory faltered at times. But then I started noticing missing receipts withdrawals from my account. I couldn't remember authorizing envelopes of cash that seemed to vanish from my desk drawer. When I asked about it, Clara would smile too quickly. "Oh, Dad, you probably just forgot. Don't stress yourself." One evening, I woke in the middle of the night to the sound of voices in the kitchen, Mark and Clara speaking in hushed tones. I crept halfway down the stairs, staying in the shadows. "We can't wait much longer," Clara whispered. "He's getting weaker every day," Mark replied. "We just need him out of the way, then everything is ours." My chest tightened. I wanted to believe I had misheard, that exhaustion had twisted their words. I wanted to rush down and confront them, demand to know what they meant. But my legs refused to move. Instead, I stood frozen, listening to my children plot in the dark. When I made a noise on the stairs, they fell silent, then forced laughter, pretending they had just been reminiscing. I let it go, though my stomach churned. The signs piled up. One afternoon, Clara brought me tea. The aroma was off bitter in a way I couldn't explain. I didn't drink it, but later I saw her watching me closely, as if expecting me to collapse. My doctor warned me about drowsiness from new medication, but I hadn't started anything new. Was it paranoia to think the tea had been tampered with? I shook my head, telling myself, "No, Harold, don't be foolish. She's your daughter." But the unease lingered. Another time I returned from a short walk and found the lock on my study door broken. Papers were scattered across the desk, my will pulled from the drawer. Mark was standing there, startled, like a thief caught in the act. He claimed he was looking for an old photograph. I wanted to believe him, but the excuse was too thin. I could feel the lie dripping from his tongue. Even the neighbors noticed changes. Mrs. Donnelly next door asked me one morning if I was moving away soon. Confused, I asked what she meant. She said she had heard Mark and Clara talking in the yard about selling the house, about buyers already lined up. My house, my life's work, sold without a word to me. I laughed it off, told her she must have misheard. But when I confronted Clara, she avoided my eyes, muttering something about just planning for the future. The worst moment came when I overheard a phone call, Clara in her room speaking in a low voice. Yes, the paperwork is ready. Once it's official, no one will question it. She paused, then said, "Of course the certificate will look real. My brother already has a connection at the office." My blood ran cold. A certificate, real enough to fool anyone. At that moment, I didn't yet know it was my own death certificate. But something inside me screamed that my children were preparing for a future without me, and they weren't planning to wait for nature to take its course. Still, I tried to silence the voice of suspicion. Parents always do. We don't want to see our children as monsters. We tell ourselves they are stressed, confused, making mistakes. I told myself, maybe they're worried about money. Maybe they're just planning too far ahead. I chose to believe lies rather than face the unbearable truth. Because facing the truth meant admitting that the two people I had sacrificed everything for were sharpening knives behind my back. I remember one Sunday dinner, sitting at the head of the table, watching them laugh and joke with each other. To an outsider, we looked like the perfect family, but I noticed how their eyes avoided mine, how their laughter died whenever I spoke, how they exchanged quick glances like conspirators in on a secret. The food turned to ash in my mouth. It's strange the things you notice when trust begins to erode. Every locked door feels suspicious. Every whisper sounds like plotting. Every smile looks rehearsed. I began to live in constant unease, caught between love and fear. Part of me wanted to confront them, to demand answers. Another part clung to hope that I was wrong, that my children were still the same little boy who slept in the garage beside me, and the little girl who left love notes in my lunchbox. But deep down, I knew. A father always knows even when he doesn't want to admit it. Something was very, very wrong. So, let me ask you if you were in my shoes. If your son and daughter began acting strangely, whispering in corners, moving money without explanation, would you confront them head on? Or would you, like me, cling to denial, praying you were mistaken? Comment. Okay, right now, if you feel the dread in your chest, just imagining those first cracks in the bond of family. The night I discovered the truth, the house was unusually silent. No television murmuring in the background, no clinking of dishes in the sink. Just silence, heavy and unnatural. I had gone upstairs to fetch a blanket when I noticed Clara's bedroom door slightly ajar. A shaft of light spilled into the hallway. Inside, her voice was low but sharp, and I realized she was on the phone. I know I shouldn't have listened. A father shouldn't eavesdrop on his grown daughter. But something in her tone, cold businesslike, made me pause. "Yes, the document looks perfect," she whispered. "No one will question it. The priest, the lawyer, even the neighbors will believe. Once the obituary is published, the inheritance is ours." Obituary, inheritance. My skin went cold. She listened for a moment, then laughed softly, a sound I barely recognized. "Of course it'll be a closed casket. That way no one can doubt it. By the time anyone realizes the truth, it'll be too late." I stumbled backward, my knees threatening to give way. A closed casket, an obituary. She wasn't talking about the distant future, she was talking about me. I retreated into my room, my chest pounding, ears ringing. Minutes later, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Clara passed by, humming softly as if she hadn't just planned her father's fake funeral. Sleep was impossible that night. My mind reeled with fragments of her words. Document, as obituary, inheritance. I told myself it could be a misunderstanding. Maybe she was helping someone else. Maybe it wasn't about me. But at dawn, when I entered the study, the truth hit me like a hammer. My desk drawer, the one I always kept locked, had been forced open. Papers were scattered everywhere, and on top of the pile, in bold black letters, I saw it. Certificate of death. My name. My birth date. And underneath a date of death next month. I froze, staring at the grotesque mockery of my life, reduced to ink on paper. It was official looking, stamped and signed. To anyone else, it would look real. According to this piece of paper, I was already a dead man walking. That morning, when Mark came over, he didn't notice me standing in the hallway. He strode into the study, found Clara waiting for him, and whispered, "It's done then." She nodded, tapping the forged document. All we need now is the performance, a tragic story. We'll say he slipped down the stairs or had a heart attack in his sleep. Once the funeral happens, no one will doubt it. Mark grinned, a twisted echo of the boy who once laughed beside me in the garage. Finally, after all these years, we'll be free. Free. That word burned into me. Free from what? From their own father. From the man who worked himself to the bone to give them a life better than his own. I wanted to storm into that room, slam the paper in their faces, demand answers. But my instinct screamed at me to stay silent. They were too sure of themselves, too far gone. If I revealed what I knew, they might not wait until next month to finish the job. So I retreated once again into my silence, my hands trembling as I clutched the banister. My children, my own blood, were staging my death while I was still breathing. They were rehearsing my funeral like a play, planning the lines, the tears, the condolences. And when the curtain fell, they would inherit everything I had ever worked for. That was the moment the father in me died. The man who once made excuses for their behavior, who told himself they were just stressed, just misguided, he disappeared. What replaced him was something colder, sharper. If my children wanted me dead on paper, I would become something else in reality. A ghost who watched, who listened, who prepared. Because here's the cruelest part. When you learn your children are planning your funeral, you don't just fear death. You begin to crave justice. So let me ask you, if you found a death certificate with your name on it, signed and stamped, would you confront your children right then? Or would you stay quiet, bide your time, and let them believe you were blind? Comment yes, right now, if you'd keep your silence like I did just long enough to catch them in their own trap. From the moment I saw that forged death certificate, every hour felt like a countdown. The walls of my home, once filled with laughter and warmth, had become a stage where my children rehearsed my funeral in broad daylight. They didn't even bother hiding it anymore. Perhaps they thought I was too frail, too blind, too broken to notice. But I noticed everything. The very next week, Clara suggested inviting the neighbors over for tea. It struck me as odd we had never been close with anyone beyond a polite wave from across the fence. But that afternoon, she set out cookies, brewed coffee, and played the role of the grieving daughter, preparing for a future she pretended hadn't arrived yet. Dad's health has been declining, she told Mrs. Donnelly with a tragic sigh, as if I weren't sitting in the next room pretending to read my newspaper. The doctor says it could be any day now. We're trying to prepare ourselves. I gripped the paper so tightly it nearly tore. Any day now. My daughter was planting the story, seeding the narrative so that when the accident happened, no one would raise an eyebrow. Mark chimed in, his voice heavy with false concern. We've even started making arrangements, just in case. It's better to be ready. Mrs. Donnelly murmured condolences, her voice dripping with sympathy. And I sat there invisible as my children rehearsed my death with the neighbors as their audience. That night, my dinner tasted strange again. Clara insisted on cooking, waving me away from the stove. I pushed the food around my plate, watching her eyes flick toward me each time I lifted my fork. I ate little, pretending to be tired. But when I scraped the leftovers into the trash, later the smell of something bitter rose into my nose. My gut told me the truth. They weren't planning to wait for stares or heart attacks. They wanted to weaken me first, make the accident look natural. It got worse. One morning, I went to the bank to withdraw cash only to discover several large transfers I hadn't made. The manager showed me signed forms with my name scrawled at the bottom. My own children had forged my signature. They had drained half my savings, already funneling it into accounts I couldn't access. When I confronted Clara later, she feigned shock. "Dad, you must have forgotten. Don't you remember? You asked me to handle it because you were feeling overwhelmed." Her lie was so smooth, I almost doubted my own memory. That's what betrayal does. It makes you question not just your family, but yourself. The signs piled up like storm clouds. Mark began showing up with men I didn't recognize, hard-eyed strangers who stood in the yard talking in hushed voices. I overheard one of them say, "Once it's done, you'll have the money to clear your debt." My blood ran cold. My son wasn't just greedy, he was desperate. He owed someone dangerous. My death wasn't just convenient, it was necessary for his survival. I began to notice details I had missed before. Clara kept a folder in her bag stuffed with legal documents. One afternoon when she wasn't looking, I saw the heading on one power of attorney. They weren't waiting for me to die. They were stripping me of control while I was still alive. The final blow came when I stumbled upon them in the living room one evening. They didn't see me at first. Mark was pacing, rehearsing words under his breath. It was so sudden. One moment he was fine, the next, gone. We tried everything. We called for help. It was just too late. Clara dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, practicing sobs that came on cue. Dad was the best father anyone could ask for. She whispered, her voice trembling with practiced grief. We'll never forget him. I felt my knees weaken. They were rehearsing my eulogy while I was still breathing. I backed away before they noticed me, retreating into the shadows of my room. That was when the denial that had clung to me finally shattered. They weren't misguided children making mistakes. They were predators circling their prey, and I was the prey. But I am not as weak as they think. I began my own quiet preparations. I stopped eating food I hadn't cooked myself. I locked my study and kept the key hidden. I wrote letters, sealed envelopes addressed to my lawyer and to old friends I still trusted. In them, I detailed everything: the forged documents, the overheard conversations, the suspicious behavior. I tucked the letters into places my children would never think to look. At night, when the house was quiet, I dug into my past, old contacts, old instincts. I hadn't survived 70 years by being naive. My children thought they were playing chess against an old man nodding off in his chair, but I had been playing this game long before they were born. Still, the days grew heavier. Every smile they gave me was a mask. Every touch carried the weight of betrayal. And worst of all was the gnawing question in my chest. How had we come to this? I had built my life for them, bled for them, sacrificed every dream so they could have more. And now they looked at me and saw not a father, but a dollar sign. The tension escalated with each passing day. Mark began urging me to go on long walks with him, near the old quarry outside town. "Fresh air will do you good, Dad," he said, with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. Clara kept insisting we redo the staircase railing, shaking it dramatically and muttering about accidents waiting to happen. Their plans were no longer whispers in the night. They were out in the open, dressed as care. One evening, Mark cornered me in the kitchen. He leaned close, his voice low. "You should start getting your affairs in order, Dad. None of us live forever." His breath smelled of whiskey, his eyes bloodshot. "When the time comes, we'll take care of everything. You can trust us." Trust. That word tasted like poison. I smiled weakly, pretending to be the frail old man they believed me to be. But inside, fire roared. They thought they were tightening the noose, but they didn't realize I had already begun untying the knot. So I'll ask you if you discovered your own children rehearsing your funeral, forging your signature, and plotting your death. Would you run to the police immediately? Or would you stay silent, collecting evidence, waiting for the perfect moment to strike back? Comment 1 right now if you'd stay quiet and prepare, or if you'd confront them without hesitation. The day it happened was brighter than it should have been. The kind of day where the sky feels too blue, the sun too golden, as if the world is mocking you while it sharpens the knife. Mark had arrived early, a rare thing. He strode into the kitchen with forced cheer. "Morning, Dad," he said, slapping my back too hard. "Thought we'd take a little trip today. You've been cooped up too long." Clara appeared behind him carrying a picnic basket. Her smile was tight eyes glittering with a feverish anticipation she could not hide. "Yes, Dad. We thought it'd be lovely to visit the quarry. Remember how you used to take us there when we were kids, just for old time's sake?" The quarry. I felt the chill crawl up my spine. The same quarry where kids had fallen before, where an accident would be nothing more than a tragic headline. I nodded slowly, hiding the storm brewing inside me. "That sounds wonderful." As we drove, I studied them from the back seat. To anyone else, they might have looked like a devoted son and daughter, escorting their aging father on a wholesome outing. But I could see the cracks. Mark's grip on the wheel was too tight. Clara's fingers tapped restlessly on the basket. Their eyes avoided mine, as if looking at me would shatter the illusion. We parked near the edge of the quarry, the wind sharp against our faces. The cliffs stretched before us, jagged teeth biting into the sky. Clara spread a blanket, humming a tune that was far too cheerful. Mark paced the edge, kicking at stones, glancing back at me. "Come here, Dad," he called. "The view's amazing. You can see the whole valley." I rose slowly, feigning stiffness in my knees, and shuffled toward him. Inside, every nerve was on fire. Clara positioned herself behind me a little too close. The trap was ready. And that was when I played my move. As Mark reached to steady me near the cliff, I slipped a small digital recorder from my pocket, pressing the button so that the red light glowed. My voice trembled, but not from fear. "Tell me again, Mark. What is it you're planning?" For a moment, silence hung in the air. Mark froze, his hand hovering near my shoulder. Clara stiffened, the smile sliding off her face. What are you talking about? Dad Mark forced a laugh, but his eyes betrayed him. I mean this, I said, pulling from my coat pocket the forged death certificate I had taken from the study weeks earlier. Their eyes widened. You two rehearsed my funeral. You forged my signature. You've already stolen my money. Why not finish the job here, Why not push the old man over the edge? The mask cracked. Clara's face twisted, venom spilling from her lips. You should have died years ago. Do you think we want to waste our lives waiting on you? Everything you have is ours already. You just won't let go. Mark's voice dropped its pretense of warmth. It was cold steel now. It doesn't matter if you know. No one will believe you. You're just an old man losing his mind. They'll think you wandered too close to the cliff. We'll cry the loudest at your funeral, and no one will suspect a thing. My hand tightened around the recorder in my pocket, capturing every word. My heart pounded, but I forced myself to meet their eyes, steady and unbroken. You think I'm blind. You think I'm weak. But I've been preparing for this moment. Every lie you rehearsed, every threat you whispered, I have it all. And now the world will hear it. Mark lunged. Clara screamed, rushing forward to shove me, but I was ready. I sidestepped their momentum, carrying them dangerously close to the edge. Gravel skittered beneath their shoes. For one terrifying second, I thought they would tumble into the abyss. Mark caught himself snarling. He grabbed my arm, twisting hard. If you want to fight, old man, you'll get one. Pain shot through me, but adrenaline drowned it. I shoved him back, my voice a roar I hadn't unleashed in decades. You killed your mother with worry. You betrayed your blood. You are no son of mine. Clara tried again, pulling at my sleeve, her face contorted. We could have had everything, Dad. Why couldn't you just die quietly? That was when headlights cut across the quarry. Tires crunched on gravel. A second car pulled up, and two figures stepped out, Detective Harris and my lawyer, Mr. Doyle. Their voices rang out like salvation. Step away from him, Harris barked, his gun drawn. Mark froze. Clara gasped. Their carefully constructed play collapsed in an instant. You see, I hadn't just written letters. I had given Doyle copies of the recordings, the documents, even my suspicions about the trip. He had gone to the police, and they had come prepared. Clara's knees buckled. Mark's bravado cracked, rage spilling into panic. This is a setup. He's lying. He's senile. But Harris lifted the recorder I had handed Doyle days earlier. He pressed play, and Clara's voice filled the air. You should have died years ago. Everything you have is ours already. The echo of her betrayal hung over the quarry, undeniable, inescapable. Mark collapsed onto the dirt, his face pale. Clara sobbed, clutching her head. I stood tall, bruised but unbroken, my dignity blazing brighter than it had in years. I gave you everything I said, my voice low but sharp, and you tried to bury me before my time. You rehearsed my death, but this, I gestured to Harris and Doyle, this is your performance's final act. The officers moved in, cuffing them as they protested, screamed, begged, but it was over. Their empire of lies had crumbled, and as they were led away, I turned my eyes to the horizon. The quarry that was meant to be my grave had become their stage of downfall. For the first time in years, I breathed deeply, freely. But let me ask you, if you had been in my place standing on the cliff with your own children, ready to push you into the void, would you have forgiven them? Or, would you, like me, let justice strip them of every mask? Comment 9. Right now, if you believe betrayal, this deep deserves no forgiveness. The silence that followed their arrest was heavier than the screams that came before. For weeks, my home had echoed with whispers, with plotting, with rehearsals of a funeral that was never meant to be. Now, at last, it was quiet. I should have felt relief. And in some ways, I did. But don't mistake justice for joy. There is nothing joyful about watching your own children hauled away in handcuffs. The trial came swiftly. The evidence was overwhelming: recordings of their voices, forged documents, bank transfers, even the death certificate with my name on it. The courtroom was packed the day I took the stand. I looked across the room and saw Mark and Clara sitting at the defendant's table, their faces pale, stripped of all pretense. Once they had smiled at me like children, now they glared at me like enemies. I spoke softly, but every word carried weight. I am not here for revenge, I told the jury. I am here for dignity. My children tried to bury me alive. They plotted to erase me for money, but I stand here because the truth matters. A man's life is more than his bank account. A father's worth is more than his property. And when family betrays family, it is not just a crime, it is a wound that never heals. The verdict was guilty. Fraud, conspiracy, attempted murder. My children were sentenced, their futures sealed by the choices they had made. As the judge's gavel fell, I felt no triumph, only sorrow, because no matter what they had done, they were still mine. And that is the cruelest part of betrayal. It cuts deepest, because it comes from those you love most. In the weeks after, neighbors came to visit, some with casseroles, some with apologies. "We never suspected," Mrs. Donnelly said, shaking her head. "They fooled us all, but I no longer cared what the neighbors thought. Their opinions could not stitch the hole in my chest. What mattered was that I had survived. I had faced the grave my children dug for me and climbed back out with my dignity intact. I rewrote my will. Not a single cent would go to Mark or Clara. Instead, I left everything to my grandchildren, innocent souls who should not bear the weight of their parents' sins. And a portion went to a local charity, because if my life had taught me anything, it was that money only has value when it helps, not when it corrupts." At night, I sit on the porch, the same spot where I once dreamed of peaceful retirement. The stars look the same, but I am not the same man. Betrayal aged me in ways no clock ever could. Yet I am not broken. I am still here. I still breathe. And my dignity, though scarred, remains unshaken. So, what is the lesson of my story? It is this: do not mistake silence for weakness. Do not mistake age for surrender. I may have looked frail, but my spirit was steel. My children believed they could erase me, that greed could triumph over blood. But greed destroys itself. Betrayal devours its own. And in the end, the truth rises just as I rose alive to walk into my own funeral. To anyone listening, remember, this dignity is worth more than gold. Honor cannot be sold or stolen. And when betrayal comes, and it often comes from those closest to you, you must choose. Will you sink into the grave they dug for you, or will you rise and show the world that no one buries your spirit without a fight? I made my choice. I chose justice over silence. I chose dignity over despair. I chose to live even when my own children wish me dead. And now I ask you, the one hearing my story, what would you have done in my place? Could you forgive children who staged your death? Could you ever look them in the eye again? Or would you like me cut ties forever and reclaim your honor? Comment. Justice right now, if you believe dignity is worth more than blood. Because betrayal may break your heart, but it does not have to break your spirit.